I will give you just a short introduction into our collections because our museum differs from the majority of museums which are included into the project. We are the Slovene Ethnographic Museum, and I'm Bojana Rogelj Škafar. I used to be director of the museum for 10 years, and from September on I'm the museum counselor, and now I'm responsible for folk art collections and pictorial sources collection as well. So, in short, it's interesting, I think, for you to hear the mission statement of the museum. The Slovene Ethnographic Museum is the state ethnological museum and is a museum about people for people, a museum of cultural identities, a link between the past and the present, between traditional and modern culture, between our own and other cultures, between the natural environment and civilization. It is a museum of dialogue, open, active and hospitable, dedicated to serving the public. It researches, collects, presents and promotes traditional culture, as well as mass and pop culture in Slovenia, the Slovenes living in diaspora, non-European collections, and the intangible cultural heritage in Slovenia. The number of objects in storage is 50,000, and the Slovene collection has grown to 40,000 objects, and non-European collections to 10,000 objects. Number of objects on display is 302,020 objects on permanent exhibitions. We have 2 permanent exhibitions, and approximately 1,700 objects on temporary exhibitions in 2015. Profile of the collection: Slovene and non-European collections in the field of material, social and spiritual culture, which the museum preserves, documents, researches, presents and communicates. First level are Slovene collections that illuminate the everyday life of the Slovenes from the past to today. They are the result of the maturing process of ethnological and anthropological science in Slovenia from the beginning of 1821 to today. By the end of the 19th century, the collections had acquired a more determined local physiognomy with the identification of 3 cultural landscapes: the Mediterranean, Alpine and Sub-Pannonian, which is the reason why these collections were always referred to in a wider European context. Today, they are treated in a contemporary ways as multi-layered bearers of information, a material witness of working and festive days in the life of rural and urban population, and as narrators of creativity, knowledge, wisdom, and coexistence with the natural world. The collecting policy is based on an analytical overview in ongoing research into collections. It is directed towards the appropriate supplementation of existing collections in terms of period, region, and the social aspects. The growth of the collection of material testimonies of the everyday life of Slovene immigrants, the supplementation of material from Slovene ethnic areas outside Slovenia borders, and the creation and supplementation of collections of objects that illustrate contemporary mass culture. Then the second layer is intangible heritage, because the museum is the main national coordinator for the registration and safeguarding of intangible heritage in Slovenia, preparing since 2011 proposals and it is responsible for entry of living heritage in the National Register of the Intangible Cultural Heritage of Slovenia. It is set up in response to the UNESCO Convention on the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage. And then finally, non-European collections. They are arranged by continents and by donors or sellers, who include researchers, globetrotters, missionaries, seamen, merchants, and diplomats. For example, Ignacy Knoblehar collection from South Sudan, Kodeli's collection from Togo, Indonesian, Bibler, and Chinese Skušek collections, Baraga's North American Indian collections, and so on. Non-European collections are built and supplemented on the basis of the following criteria. In terms of their testimony of Slovene encountering non-European cultures and forming an attitude towards them. Then in terms of contextuality, systematicity, research foundations, testimony, conveyance of the cultural image of everyday life, in terms of cultural specifics, cultural resourcefulness, and museum ethics. So this is just in short. And to say that only 2 curators, yes, only 2 curators take care of non-European collections. One for the Americas and Africa, and one for the Asia, Oceania, and Australia. So this is our situation, and I think to know you better, it is here my colleague Marko Frelih who will tell, just in short, how these African collections are treated in our museum, because they're also in the core of SWICH project. So thank you for your attention.
So just a short presentation of our museum by my side. Non-European collections, I'm a curator for half of the world, for collections from Africa and Americas. And the oldest collection in our museum, it's not from Africa, and here we have colleagues from United States, and yesterday I added this information, short information, that the oldest collection is from North America, collected by missionary Friedrich Baraga, and he brought this object from area of Great Lakes in early 19th century in 1837. So in same date, as you see, we got in Slovenian language first description of North American everyday lives with famous story of Pocahontas. And so this was so-called the model for the collecting of another Slovenian missionaries on a different part of the world. And just short information, as our colleague from Manitoba Museum, I put yesterday late evening this information, that he wrote a dictionary and grammar of Ojibwa language, missionary Baraga. So, and we are talking about collection. Of course, we have small collections, just 2,000 objects from Africa and Americas. And of course, I try to study this background, the stories of missionaries, of people who traveled around, and I checked material in different archives. I found this very interesting picture of North America, of the area of Great Lakes from 1849. So the influence of Baraga was on another missionary as Knoblecher. The time of Knoblecher, Ignacy Knoblecher mission in Sudan, the Slovenes became really interested in Africa for the first time in history. They were informed of the events on the White Nile by the daily press, and Knoblecher treated his fellow countrymen to a big surprise when he brought around 350 African objects to Ljubljana in the summer of 1850. He organized the installation of the first African exhibition in Ljubljana, centered on the presentation of the people of South Sudan. Today we have 230 objects in Ljubljana, and another part of collection is in Weltmuseum in Vienna. So he was missionary in Gondokoro, today Juba in South Sudan. He spent about 10 years in the area of Bari people, and we organized one exhibition in 2009 with presentation of his object. So in the main focus of the exhibition in Ljubljana was different topics, and we still discovered, of course, these famous stories about Knoblecher mission in South Sudan. The period before the First World War is marked by a notable episode in the history of Slovene-African contacts. Baron Kodeli was a member of a reputed aristocratic family from Ljubljana and well-known electrical engineer. In 1911, the Telefunken company entrusted him with the construction of telegraph station in the German colony of Togo in West Africa. Kodeli and his team managed to erect an extensive system of antenna and radiograph stations in the central part of Togo. So we have his photographic archive with 600 photos with very interesting motifs, how they built these famous wireless communications between Africa and Berlin. And the most interesting topic of this exhibition from 2007 was the story about the movie. We have movies not present, but we have photos from the scenes. The title was The White Goddesses of the Vangora. And as you see, Cordelio was the film producer. His mother, Rosalia, wrote a simple love story. His friend was he played in the side role. And the German, Hans Schomburg, was a cameraman. The cameraman was English, the German was director, and the famous actress was Meg Gertz. And in this year, 2015, is 100th anniversary when she wrote her book about his experience in Africa, and she mentioned special stories about this movie, White Goddesses from Vangora. And of course, I'm very interested for any information about this movie which disappeared in London. And the second part of our collections is very important from the period of Yugoslavia. You know, this is the time when Yugoslavia played an important role in the organization of the non-alignment movement, and its charismatic president, Broz Tito, contributed much to its leading position. So a lot of Slovenians were in Yugoslavia, in Africa in this period. One of our colleagues, Mrs. Jeglic, he was close friend of famous artist Alberto Chisano, and we organized one exhibition a few years ago with these nice pictures of artist and his masterpiece. And this year we got by Mrs. and Mr. Jeglic donation of this famous piece. We got donation in our museum. So a lot of contacts between Africa and Slovenians were documented in the connections with Egypt, because Egypt was one of the countries which was close connected with Slovenian territory because of the ship relations between Trieste and Alexandria, and a lot of Slovene missionaries, travelers, and diplomats worked in Egypt in last 200 years. And we try to promote our Egyptian collections. It's very small, just about 100 objects, but we try to promote this in last year, especially last year was so-called Egyptian year in our museum. So this is just few pictures from the exhibition. And the last picture, it's not just the end of my presentation, is the picture which is beginning of new stories. We try to reconstruct the so-called missionaries museum between First and Second War, and this is one of picture we have now in the museum from so-called Missionary Society St. Claver, and in the future we try to reconstruct works, activities, and special museum collections of St. Claver Society. So thank you very much for a short presentation.